Hi, welcome everybody to the Empathy Conversation. I'm Miranda McKerney. I'm one of EmpathyLab's founders, and I'm guiding tonight's debate, which features four rather wonderful people, all in their different ways. So we have with us Lemn Sissay, Katherine, Rundell, Manjeet Mann, and Professor Robin Banerjee. A fascinating blend of perspectives in the areas of psychology, literature, and social change. So I'm hoping they're about to join me.
So away. Hey.
Lem, hi, Manjeet, hi.
Hello.
Hi, Katherine, hi. We
Hello.
are assembled, hooray. So as I say, I'll introduce you properly in a second. And just to say to everybody watching that as we go along tonight, do put any comments or questions in. You can either tweet us or put comments on YouTube or Facebook. So this event comes in the run-up to Empathy Day on June the 9th, and it's part of a much wider, more urgent debate across society, really, about how on earth we can build a more empathetic society, especially at a time when the world feels so very worryingly wrong, and the pandemic's effect on our children is causing so much concern. And we at EmpathyLab passionately believe that every child deserves the chance to be surrounded by empathetic adults and to develop this core life skill, not at all a fluffy thing, empathy. And we believe that empathy helps us be the best version of ourselves that we can be, and that it's a force for social change. So our mission is to raise an empathy educated generation who will go on to build a more caring, a less tribal world. And our work is built around two key areas of scientific research. Firstly, that empathy is learnable, and it surprises a lot of people that only 10% of our empathic capacity is genetic. And secondly, that because of how our brains work when we read, stories are a powerful empathy building tool. So we founded Empathy Day in 2017 to be a lightning rod for debate, for development, for action. And it sits alongside our annual Read for Empathy book collection for 4 to 16-year-olds and an in-depth skills programme. I'll say more at the end about how you can all get involved in Empathy Day. The theme this year is Empathy, Our Human Superpower. And we hope everyone will be inspired to take up our challenge to do 9 really practical empathy boosting activities like empathy walks. So enough background to our panelists. Manjeet Mann burst onto the children's book scene with her debut YA first novel, Run Rebel, which won multiple awards. And her second first novel, The Crossing, won last year's Costa's Children Book Award and is in the running for this year's Carnegie Medal. Before that, she was an actress and playwright, and after my own heart, is an activist, having founded Run the World, a non-profit using sport and theatre to empower women. Then there's poet Lemn Sissay, whose achievements are all the more remarkable because of his truly horrible start in life when his foster family abandoned him to a brutal care system. And I expect many of you will have read his recent book, My Name is Why, which explores this story. And this is a tough but very necessary read. Lem's now a best-selling writer. And you can see his spine-tingling poems on walls from Manchester to Addis Ababa. He was awarded an OBE last year as Chancellor of Manchester University, and I have to say, is an inspiration. Katherine Rundell's writing is also spine-tingling, and my goodness, her 5 children's novels have quickly become multi-million bestsellers and won practically every major children's book prize. She grew up in Africa and Europe, then went to Oxford University, eventually becoming a fellow of All Souls College. And just try this. You may well have read her novels, but you might not have read this lovely little book, Why You Should Read Children's Books Even Though You Are So Old and Wise. Alongside writing, Katherine studies Renaissance literature, and I so want to hear more about this. Says go climbing on the rooftops late at night. Finally, the psychology perspective comes tonight from Professor Robin Banerjee, Head of Psychology at Sussex University. We're so lucky at EmpathyLab because Robin is our expert advisor, and he's fascinating, as you'll hear, on how empathy develops in children and its role in education. He's influential in all the best possible ways. Advisor to Welsh Government on the new curriculum for Wales, which features empathy 35 times, sometimes called Professor Kindness, recently helped lead with Radio 4 an investigation into the nature of kindness. So welcome to all four of you. And Manjeet, at the moment, this is a bit weird, but you're sideways on my screen. Is she sideways on anybody else's?
She is. I'm getting into it. It's kind of a creative thing going on here. But we've got to do a bit of mental rotation here.
I'm sure the team is sorting it out, but let's hope we have Manjeet back. I'm not even sure she's live.
I think it's frozen, hasn't it?
Yeah. Bother. Well, we'll bring her in as and when we can. I'm sure it's just a small technical thing. So I'm going to kick off by asking each of you if you wouldn't mind sharing a book recommendation, because a central Empathy Day thread is always a mass sharing of empathy-rich books. And this year, to tie in with the theme of empathy being our human superpower, we want everyone to go absolutely crazy recommending an empathy boosting book in a kind of dramatic physical power pose. So here's a sneak preview, I hope, on a slide of Jacqueline Wilson's and Jamie Littler's. But the team, yes, here they are. Great. I love these. So we're hoping to fill the airways with talk of empathy and books that build it and drown out the hate. So I'm just going to ask you each very quickly to share your recommendation and the reason for it. Lemn, could we start with yours?
Anyway, my book is called Hold Still, and it's a set of photographs chosen by the Duchess of Cambridge of kind of when we were in lockdown, and it's just it's photographs taken by people from the nation through lockdown, and it's just extremely powerful, and it makes us empathize with each other.
Yeah, and everything we went through. Yeah. Great, thank you for that. Katherine, can we have yours?
Of course. So mine is Frank Cottrell Boyce's Millions, which is an old book that I think I actually read as a child. And I love it in part because it is a book about a little boy who loses his mother. And it is deeply warm about grief and about the ways of grieving and about the element of comedy that is even in grief. But one of the things I love is when you're a kid reading it, you can see that he's doing all sorts of extremely unusual things, which seem to adults to be quietly unhinged. He's talking to saints, and the saints are real for him. And you can see the teachers reacting to him and his response to it. And I think there's this gorgeous thing that as you read it, as a small child, you realize there is the way you think you're acting. There is the way that you're coming across to the world. There are the things that grief induce in you. There are generosities that people offer you. And they are all layered over each other into a deep, deep intricacy. And I love Frank for that, for this sense that things are not always as they seem or as they are intended. And it also has this beautiful story about coming to terms with and meeting face on, saluting the love that is within grief. It's a brilliant book.
Into my box of books from when my children are young, and I pulled out an old one as well. Like Katherine was saying, this is the one I chose. And really, this is in memory of an absolutely amazing children's author, Shirley Hughes, who sadly passed away earlier this year. But really, what an impact her books have had on so many millions of families and children around the world. But really, that book, Dogger, I mean, It is an absolute classic. And I think it just touches on something so fundamental, which is about the emotional drama of everyday life. Emotions, feelings are all around us. And in this case, you know, it's a book about a little boy who loses his very favorite cuddly toy and then gets it back through a really lovely act of kindness. And you just get in a little microcosm the wonderful richness of our emotional lives and the connections that we can make with each other through understanding and sharing each other's emotions is just so powerful. And so that's my choice. It's a lovely book.
Thank you, Robin. So it's become a tradition in our annual debate that we ask Robin to kind of kick us off with a tiny bit of briefing on the psychology of empathy and any latest research developments. So Robin, could I first ask you just to describe what empathy actually is and how it works in humans?
That is our classic start to the empathy conversation, Miranda, and I'm glad you asked about it because I'm going to give my usual answer. It's a really important one to remind ourselves of. Empathy is not just one thing. There are many different subcomponents to it, but at least three things we need to bear in mind. When we're thinking of empathy, we need to recognize that there's an affective, emotional dimension, which is all about sharing the feelings of others. But there's also a really important cognitive dimension, and that's all about understanding the feelings, not just experiencing vicariously the emotions that might be happening to someone else, but also understanding where they come from. Why is that person feeling that way? What might be going on that led to that emotion? And then there's the third key element. And this is a really important one in terms of translating empathy into action. This is all about what we might call a kind of empathic or pro-social concern, wanting to do something to help, wanting to do something to, for example, alleviate someone else's distress. And it's really the combination of those three things: sharing another person's emotional experience, understanding it, and then wanting to do something to, in a sense, care for others, to actually show that you're paying attention to others people's feelings and caring for that, wanting to make a positive impact. It's that combination that so magically turns empathy into positive action. And of course, the word, you know I'm going to use this, Miranda, the word that comes to mind there is kindness.
Yes, absolutely. And you've been doing all this work on kindness. And you've also just got a new research grant. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about those two things, Robin?
Absolutely. So one of the big things that we've been working on most recently is what you talked about, Miranda, a big partnership with the BBC, particularly through Radio 4, on something we've called the kindness test, which was a huge online questionnaire. We didn't know at the beginning that it was going to be such a huge questionnaire. We put this out probably, it must have been summer of last year. It was only out for about 5 weeks. We got over 60,000 people responding to this questionnaire. It's the largest ever in this particular series of academic partnerships that the BBC had done on this Radio 4's public science program. And it was absolutely fascinating because we got an insight into people's everyday experience of kindness. Now, you might think, well, what is there to know about kindness? Well, actually, it is there all around us, but we don't know all that much about it. We haven't really studied it scientifically, and that's what we were trying to do. We're trying to understand more about where we experience it, where it is valued, where it isn't valued, how it's related to important aspects of our functioning. And empathy is right at the core of it. In fact, one of the things we did right at the beginning of the questionnaire was we asked people, what are the words they associate with kindness? 60,000 people. First word most commonly associated with kindness, well, it was empathy. So there's something really fundamental about empathy being like the foundation for our connections, our positive connections with other people. What we're trying to do now, and we've just got a large research grant to focus on this, of course in partnership with EmpathyLab, is to learn more about how that connection between empathy and pro-social behavior and kindness can be nurtured through the world of books, the world of stories. And there is really good evidence, and of course that's really the foundation for what EmpathyLab has been doing so well. There's really good evidence already that empathy and kindness are connected and can be stimulated and nurtured through engaging with stories, engaging with the world of fantastic characters that amazing authors like the people who are in front of us right here have created. And it's just extraordinary. What we want to do now in the research over the next 3 years, it's quite a big long-term project, is to really get into the detail of how that works, why it works, and what are the real details around what makes a difference in terms of using stories and books as a vehicle for supporting children's empathy and thereby their kindness.
Great. So fantastic to have a kind of sound research base for all of this. It's great. And Katherine, I know you come at things from a different academic perspective, but it's wonderful to have two academics with us. So my first question, I'm actually going to ask you, Lemn, if you could kick us off, but do everybody chip in as well. So I've said that our theme this year is empathy is our human superpower. So if you could team
No, I want to go back and to explain Hold Still all over again so I can make it sound as good as Katherine and Robin made their book sound. I felt yeah, okay. Sorry, yes.
So empathy, why is it a human superpower? And I'm so conscious of in your early life, you so suffered from lack of it.
Well, it is all relative, isn't it? So if a mother watches, or a father, or whoever watches their child for the first time cut themselves and sees blood on their child's finger, the blood that what they're feeling at that moment in time, at that particular moment in time, is as bad as anything that I've ever been through. Isn't that interesting? That it's all relative, and that your experience, mine, it can be seen as universally terrifying. But actually, I think I've come to learn that we all have a certain amount of pain, and that it is relative to our own experience. And I don't know whether my experience is any worse than anybody else's. Ultimately, we all become orphans. You know, ultimately we lose the ones that we love. That's the kind of circle of life. You know what I mean? So it's like, so because that is the case, I just feel like I've had a very large dose very early on, and that will have had advantages. It will have allowed me to understand very early the life force of empathy, and bridges will have been built in my childhood that were built on empathy from other people. And I grew up thinking mine was a singular journey, you know, of me fighting his way through the hero narrative. Fits perfectly. But actually, you know, empathy played a large role because there were key people who were kind to me relative to their own stories, okay? Not relative to mine. I could always say, well, it wasn't kind enough, pal. But actually, the truth is that empathy in me also has allowed me to see, this is just such a gift, to see empathy in others. You see? And that includes your enemies. That includes people who you think did the worst to you. You start to understand that they did as best as they could. It was the worst thing that could have happened to me. It was the best that they could do. Does that make sense?
You know, when listening to you talk, Lemn, it's so powerful because what you describe seems to me to really capture that sense of resilience, which is a word that gets bandied around, right? That idea of resilience, that, you know, really experiencing significant adversity and somehow coming through and finding strength in that process, like you're describing, seeing empathy in others, actually being able to perceive that in others seems like a real strength. But I guess the question that immediately comes to my mind, and maybe that's the psychologist in me, is where does that resilience come from? What enables you to be able to get strength from that adversity?
Well, the easy answer would be it is from God, or the easy answer would be, well, it is from, people say to me, oh, you're a great survivor. But, as a psychologist, you'll know that means that only to live, I'll need to survive. I need constantly to be in a state of survival to prove that I can live. That's not good enough. By the way, Superman had a similar experience. What do you mean? Lost his parents, thrown in a place that he shouldn't have been, was fostered and adopted, always wanted to see basically lied about who he really was, okay, because he was so frightened of seeing who he really was feared intimate relationships consistently. The thing that made him powerless was a piece of his home, of his own story that he had to ultimately face up to. What I'm trying to say is that I don't know what I'm trying to say, but I don't know.
We're all like Superman.
I think I don't know what it is. I'll tell you what I do know. I do know that there's something in this world that's bigger than my story. That was a very important thing. I don't know what that is. Okay, for me, when I look at Katherine and her work and how many people read it, and I think about all 5 people who've read my poems over the years, I think, no, okay, all right, that's being falsely modest. But I do think, but definitely not as many as Katherine, but I do think that creativity is a higher power, wherever that comes from, whatever you believe in, that's fair, it's all good. But there is something about the imagination which sees the truth and tells the truth in the most non-linear way. And I think empathy and forgiveness, these things all come from that same place.
That's really interesting. I love that. It's almost like you kind of have to unlock the creativity to be able to bring that out. And maybe there's some things which make it difficult, I don't know, to be able to tap into that creativity in the world. Maybe we need to find ways to release that. But
I think it's all, okay, I'll stop now, but I'll just say this. I think it's always there, creativity, and I think it's always there as a source. It's a lake that's, you can get used to the pathway to it, and then you can swim in it if you learn to swim, and etc. That metaphor can go on, but the point is that you don't need to have a painful story to be creative. You just don't. You just need to be able to access that part of yourself and then feed that with education of in whatever form that is, and continue down that road.
And the imagination plays such a key role in empathy, doesn't it? Because you're using your imagination to understand somebody else's experience.
Well, and that's what you get from the amazing books, right? I mean, I think, and of course, Lemn, you presented the whole still extraordinarily moving visual images as well. So it's the words, the stories, visual images, and of course, Miranda, thinking about it, all the books. I mean, thinking about Dogger, which I've got right in front of me, and just looking at the illustrations as well. I mean, they are so evocative and they're so powerful, and it's just wonderful how all of that comes together. Yeah.
Katherine, any perspectives?
I love what Lemn said. I absolutely agree, and I think also something about the kind of sophisticated empathy that you can learn even as a child, whereby you can learn that which seems to you when coming from other people like deliberate and purposive and absolutely indicative of character, you realize if you, I think partly through reading, partly through just sort of a general understanding that can be both taught and a process of recognition, you realize that, of course, the deep intricacy of the human heart means that so much of the way in which we act is a blend both of deliberate action and also instincts, your intuition and trauma and so many other things, which isn't quite the same thing as saying like, oh, hey, baby, we're all just winging it, none of us know what we're doing, or excusing those who act in profoundly damaging ways, but just that you realize that what seems to you to come from like they did this deliberately, even like small things, child to child, recognizing that the children who act against us when we are children, just tiny things, tiny bullying moments, that they aren't done with a kind of absolute confidence and certainty, that we are all acting through these deeply complicated, nuanced, and quite chaotic impulses that control us. I think books especially can be such an incredibly valuable way to reach that conclusion, because you see there are so many ways of being, and they are all so wildly different. And therefore, the people we encounter must be amalgamations of all these many differences. They aren't just us, but boys, or us, but from a different part of the world. I think that can be really, really helpful when you're really very young.
Yeah, absolutely. Manjeet. Robin, shall we hear from you on that? Because I know you have views on some really interesting thoughts about it's not either or.
Well, absolutely. And I think the idea of saying that empathy is something which needs to be in our schools is something we should be prepared to talk about, because I think sometimes people have the idea that there's a kind of a trade-off between the social and emotional development of children and young people in schools and their academic development. It's almost as if you're spending time talking about empathy or relationships or kindness or well-being, that you're taking time away from the academic syllabus. I mean, I do tell this anecdote from years ago. Fortunately, it's not so recent. It was from years ago. Someone said, well, I really respect what you're doing, Robin. I was doing a lot of work in schools at that time around development of social and emotional competencies. I really respect what you're doing. It's really important. I can see why it's important, but I just don't have any time for this feeling stuff, he said to me. I just don't have time for that because I've got a really packed history syllabus or math syllabus. I can't remember which one it was. And he said, I've got to get through that. And I was thinking, well, hang on a second. It's making it look like you've got to make a choice here. Now, he was saying at the same time, right, I'm also spending more than 50% of my time just trying to control the class. And I was thinking, aha, there's something going on here. Actually, the research evidence couldn't be clearer. The social and emotional development goes hand in hand with the academic development, the learning. Of course it does. Because school, learning, these are social contexts. They're deeply social contexts. Anyone thinking about their own school experience will know that it's a deeply social experience where relationships with each other matters. It makes a difference to whether you're ready to access the curriculum, whether you're ready to learn. And so I think the idea of focusing attention on empathy within the school setting shouldn't be seen as like something extra, or like, if you've got time, then you can do this as a little bit of a bonus. I would say we need to stop seeing things like empathy and kindness and relationships and well-being as being peripheral. It's not peripheral. It's core.
And one of the beautiful things about the research that reading builds real life empathy means that schools can use what they're already doing
Absolutely
to teach empathy, and that's the kind of journey that EmpathyLab is on with our schools partners.
Absolutely. And can I just say as well, I mean, there was a lovely review of research on children's empathy published a couple of years ago, and the work that came through, I thought really powerfully, was the work on something we call, it's a bit of jargon, but emotion socialization. It's all about the practices that we use in our social environment as parents or as teachers to cultivate children's skills and confidence and awareness in relation to expressing their emotions, understanding their emotions, talking about it, communicating it, all of those things. Now, that is something that happens naturally. You can't say, I'm not going to do it. Even that history teacher, when he's saying, I don't have time for feeling stuff, actually the truth of the matter is the feeling stuff is there whether he likes it or not. In that class, the feeling stuff is all over the place. So let's be smart with it.
I totally agree with that point. One of the things that people used to say to children in care, sorry, to me when I was in care, from staff members, when I asked them why do they do this job? Well, firstly, they'd say, I do this job because I love children, but they never in 18 years said it in first person.
Oof.
And so every time it was said, I became more invisible. And there's something else that there's another reason I wanted to come in there, and it went, sorry, it was just gone.
It'll come back, but that's really powerful.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. Manjeet, we're talking about empathy education in schools, and really interested in your work. Been in a lot of schools lately, haven't you? And your perspective on empathy within your work when you're in a school.
Yeah, so I've been going to loads of schools recently, talking about my books and stuff. And depending on where I go, the area, I can get very different kind of reactions from kids and stuff, to sort of going around schools in my local area in sort of like Kent, where there's kind of like quite high levels of deprivation and stuff. You get a lot of the sort of sitting back in the chair, crossing arms, rolling eyes and stuff. And I get it. Like, I do get it. It is difficult when you're, not always, but when your life is hard, it's hard to have empathy sometimes, I think, because you're struggling yourself, and I get that. And I've had two sort of like interesting sort of like instances, I guess. So I was going around schools in my local area where, just in terms of talking about the crossing and the migrant crisis and stuff, and rise of the far right, I had a very, very prickly kind of talks in schools, but it wasn't until afterwards where I've had teachers kind of email me and say, oh, you probably sort of felt that the kids weren't so engaged, or it was a bit difficult, but they've since sort of read the book and have kind of come round, and they're sort of understanding now, and they've sort of changed their views on what's going on in their area and stuff, and that is huge. That's why I do what I do. I think you can have some sort of people that are really great orators, and they're good at speaking and being on the stand and sort of, being an activist in that kind of way. For me, the way I want to kind of spread my message and spread empathy is that I'm a bit quieter. I put it in my work and get it out there that way. And the way I kind of come at my work as well is by sort of interviewing a lot of people. A lot of my research is, some of it is books and all that, articles and all that, but really I go out there and I speak to the people that I want to write about. And a lot of the questions I get asked, in terms of one of the characters in my books who joins a far right group, they sort of say, what was that like? Didn't you get really angry? Like, how can you talk to people like that, who think like that? And I just say, well, yeah, it can be, it's difficult. And I've frozen, haven't I? And you can't hear me. Okay. Because power comes from just listening. Everyone just wants to be heard, and everyone just wants to be understood, and they want to be, and just want to be heard, really.
But you know what, Manjeet, that's so interesting, because I think that connects right back to what Katherine was saying earlier. Katherine, you were making that point about the sort of nuances of people, that this isn't just about a kind of a two-dimensional, it's not just us, but one thing is different about them. It's actually seeing the whole person and understanding them for what they are, and recognizing that actually my interpretation might even be different from someone else's interpretation. And of course, that's what you get when you're kind of, I don't know if this is the right word to use, but exploring with curiosity the characters in books. And of course, that's what wonderful books do. they make you want to explore with curiosity the characters, and you do it very naturally. It's not just an intellectual exercise, it's actually quite an emotional exercise, because you're inhabiting the world of the characters. And that's what, I mean, again, another bit of jargon that we use in this research area is transportation. Right? We get transported into books, into another world. And I think that gets at, is like what Manjeet was saying, I think it takes us into someone else's world. And of course, there's that kind of combination of it's their world, but it's also, we recognize that it's our interpretation of it. I think that's what makes it so rich when we begin to explore that with other people. And one of the things we're really interested in our research in this area is how much does talking about books and about stories make a difference beyond simply the act of reading it. So I don't know, do you all find that talking about the books makes a difference?
Katherine?
I think, of course, the idea that there is first the story, and then when you discuss it, whether it's with a group of children in a class, it's a kind of ongoing salute to the concept of human complexity and even human chaos. So I think absolutely that. And then also in more personal terms, I think talking about another person can be a very bonding experience. But if you do that with real people, that's bitching. But if you are grouping together to discuss the complexity of a fictional character, what you have is a brilliant way of both, maybe loving, maybe hating. When I was from before, when I can remember, when I was a baby, my family fostered children, and my two sisters came to live with us before I can remember, and stayed their whole lives. And we became a family very much focused around these stories that my father would read us at the dinner table. And then we would talk about them like these were our friends. And so the early bits, when we didn't have that many people in common, what we had were like The Hobbit and these sort of these ways that we could, another way, I think, to externalize and discuss in a very child-friendly way what we do and don't love, became for us stories.
Yeah, that's
isn't it something also that happens in the way that we might reminisce with each other as well? I think there's quite an interesting psychological literature about how people reminisce with each other about things that have happened in their lives, and they talk about those things with each other, and they might be really, really difficult things, they might be really happy occasions, but it's that idea of just checking in with someone else and recognizing their own interpretations of what happened. And I think this happens in families all the time. It happens between friends all the time. But when you're reading books, I think something like that must be going on as well. That you're actually, I know it's not reminiscing because it's not your story, it's someone else's story, right? But I think there's something about that connection where you're beginning to understand a representation of someone's reading and their inner world in a way. And doing that with others can be tremendously empowering.
Katherine?
I think absolutely that. And this idea that, you can together build a promise, a pact that we will make the effort to understand that sort of rich complexity of humanity. And it can be within a classroom or within a friendship group, and it can be such a lasting thing. I absolutely agree with what you said, Robin.
Yeah. Lemn, you're on mute.
I wonder if this is why there's such anger or distress, I think is a better word, when we go back and we revise authors through the lens of today, and we'll say, books by this person are now off limits, and for this reason, a present day reason, which wasn't as visible, let's say, when that author wrote that book. What I'm trying to share is that the distress that a person feels when they feel like they can't uphold that book from their own childhood as a great standard bearer for the present day, standard bearer as the present day, is connected to this relationship, this unique relationship that they formed with their own childhood, actually through that book. So the book becomes a conduit for the, complexity and nuance of the person. Weirdly, there's some tendrils that come from books to readers and readers to books, which are so deeply rooted that
Lem, I had that same sensation when Miranda and the team at EmpathyLab were saying about finding a book to recommend, and I went back to my box of, I mean, my youngest is 18 now, but I went back to the box of old books from when they were really little, and I went back through them, and do you know what, Lem? I felt those tendrils. And they meant something to me as well, because I remember them from 15 years ago, or more in some cases, right? And it's quite interesting about how, and also they're not just, it's not just a kind of a intellectual or rational or reasoned understanding. Those tendrils were emotional ones. As I went through the books, they really evoked, I was saying with Dogger, they really evoked emotions. It's quite interesting. Even the act of reading, I remember.
Katherine, I know you have strong views on not just talking about, not just sharing books, but the role of literature in building empathy. How do we harness the power that it brings? And I love this bit in here where you say those who write for children are trying to arm them for the life ahead of them with everything we can find that is true. And it seems to me, that empathy is part of what is true, but I'd love to just hear any more thoughts you have on that.
Absolutely. So I think the idea of that tiny little book is that children's books, they traffic in a way that few other books are allowed to in quite the same completely transparent way in the imagination. And they are, at their best, a kind of distillation of our most vulnerable heart. At their best, they speak to sort of human hunger and human vulnerability and human compassion. And they also speak to the necessity of imagination itself. Imagination, as Manjeet so brilliantly said, the conditioned precedent of political change, of anything that is galvanic. Imagination, sort of imaginative empathy as the conditioned precedent for love. And the idea that I think children's books and love and this sense of a kind of cherishing, a kind of iron-willed cherishing of the imagination as you go into adulthood, when we start suggesting that imagination, and by extension, therefore, the things that are bound up with it, like kindness, like empathy, we start suggesting it's fundamentally an optional extra in a sort of deeply capitalistic and programmatic way of measuring worth. And so that's why I'm sort of always trying to make people continue their attachment to reading some children's books. But then exactly also, as Lemn was saying, like some of those books are very different now. And I think we can get too carried away. Like when I go to schools, I tell children, when you read, you get a front row seat into someone else's heart and they can transport and transform you. But of course, to adults, I would also say books are an empathy engine, but on your own terms. You could only read books that teach you to empathize with white boys, or you could be a reader who reads Lolita, and my friend's mother thinks Lolita is a story about a girl who is no better than she should be. Like there is always the fact that one's empathy has to be deeply politically informed, and it can't just sort of happen in a vacuum. It has to be historical, competent empathy. It can't just be a sort of a sort of untrammeled empathy, because of course, when I was at school, which isn't that long ago, I didn't study a single text with a female protagonist or a protagonist of colour. It was just men from start to finish. It was Lord of the Flies, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Hamlet, and The Merchant of Venice. And so, you know, where we choose to lay down our empathy and where we choose to suck up our empathy, I think is a very more complex, perhaps. And sometimes when I'm going to schools and talking to the 8-year-olds, I would perhaps initially lay out.
But can I just ask a question? This may seem like a really sort of naive or ignorant question, and it is basically, because I'm just in awe at how you create these wonderful, rich inputs, really, to children's emotional lives. Do you have all of that in your mind as you're doing the writing, or as you're setting about to do the writing? I mean, is it purposeful in that way? Are you thinking about that impact on the audience, or does it just happen? Not the audience, the readership. Or does it just happen in a very sort of organic way?
I think I tend to be thinking about in the individual humans that I have imagined, rather than the empathetic outcome. Because I think if you are thinking about what a real person might do, then hopefully you are creating a real-ish person on the page who you then hope a child will take. But I certainly am thinking about what the story of the book will tell children about the world that they might usefully take with them. That, you know, whether that's, you know, you are right to be afraid, but be brave anyway. Or whether it is, the world is far more infinite and vast than you think it, and therefore approach it with humility as well as delight. So I'm definitely thinking about, if I were explaining this to an adult, what is the sort of heart core, the kind of keying the ignition of what idea. But the individual characters, I think with them, I am just thinking, well, she's 10 and she's from this background and it's this year and this is how she might therefore. They feel, I'm always skeptical of people who say that, you know, my characters run away with me. That's unfair. Mine personally don't, but they do feel fairly real. But I would love to know from Lemn, because of course his poems are themselves alive.
And also, Lemn, you've recently written a children's book for your first, I think. Is that right? You're on mute. I know it's so boring. Sorry.
No, sorry, my reaction is not good. But I have written a children's book called Don't Ask the Dragon. And last night, I was a judge for the British Book Awards, and I got to sit down with Cressida Cowell. Yeah. And what an incredible woman. What an incredible human. And to judge, and we voted for Dapo Adiola's book as the illustrated book of the year, and he won the prize last night, and it was great. That's Hey You, right? Yeah, that's right. Yeah. What he did this is about empathy and kindness. What he did with Hey You is he got lots of other illustrators to illustrate each page of one story. Now, he did that on his next book after the success of the first one. It's part of a series, and he gave that away. You know, that was money in his pocket. That was career development. That was yada yada. What a wonderful thing to do! What a wonderful thing to do! And then he wins the prize and went up yesterday. And I couldn't go because I had food poisoning. Oh, but I'm in awe of children's writers. I think they're the real rock and roll, not the poets. Oh, I love that. You're Katherine. You're the real rock and roll. Yeah, the poets swagger around, you know, in front of their own mirrors. You know, they're. I mean, I don't want to be too. I'll be too cynical, but when I see children's writers, I'm like, wow, you are right on the front line. The changing of language is happening, like more so in children's book. It's more deliberate. They like the children's book section of a bookshop is where all the change is happening. It's a true reflection of what's going on in society. That's quite incredible that, for example, Heartstopper would be a massive book with young children, with children. I mean, who saw that coming?
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't, I'm old, in my mid-50s, but it's just incredible that we're on the next level when it comes down to empathy, but it's so exciting.
But maybe, Lemn, that's exactly what Miranda was talking about at the beginning, about needing empathy more than ever at the moment. Maybe it comes down to what actually Manjeet, you and Katherine have all been talking about, which is change. And empathy is like an engine for change. Maybe we need to change.
Maybe the generations that are 11, 12, 8, 7, whatever, their empathy, well-being, mindfulness is now part of their conversation, part of their whole being. It needs to be looked after. To them, they're asking those questions now when they read the books. Maybe.
Which is really interesting, because it's almost like there's an ownership, right? There's an ownership of their lives, of their planet, of the world. And there's a sense of actually there are things that we want to change. We want things to be different. And having empathy at the root of that has got to be a good thing.
I was talking to a deputy head at one of the schools we work with, and one of the, so we kind of springboard off intensive reading, very carefully and chosen intensive reading, into what might we do about this, whatever this is. And she said that one of her pupils had said empathy is activism, because that's, that's the kind of spark. Once you've really understood something and somebody, and I always think that about kindness, that you can't really be truly kind unless you've understood where somebody is really coming from. So
but that's what I mean. That's such an important point, because it goes back to what you were saying, Katherine, about not just choosing to empathize with people who you feel to be just like you. And that's a really important thing. And maybe we can actually model that in some way through the work in schools and in families and in any social context, because there is that risk, I suppose, that we end up, without even intending to, actually accentuating the divisions in society, because we exercise our empathy only within a very narrow slice of our lives, of our society, only the people that we feel that connection with. And so the idea of difference then becomes absolutely fundamental, doesn't it? And not being afraid to encounter this difference, and again, curiosity, maybe to be curious about it. You said seeing where people come from. Maybe that idea of approaching difference without being afraid is really important.
I think empathy, I think that for me anyway, forgiveness, kindness, empathy, I get a lot out of it. Do you know what I mean? If I do something good, like kind, I get so much out of it. It's ridiculous. And that's not what motivates me, but it's kind of handy. You know what I mean? If you want something to be given to you, give something away.
That's so beautiful.
The strangest thing, but it's true.
Yeah.
But you can't give it away because you want something to be given to you either.
Yeah. Oh, well, this is a beautiful segue into, because I can't quite believe it, we're nearly 8 o'clock and I want to leave time for audience questions.
Yes.
So it's a kind of segue into asking you about empathy resolutions, because every year for Empathy Day, we ask children, wherever they're doing Empathy Day, to end with an empathy resolution. And this year, Phil Earle and Patrice Lawrence, amazing authors, are kind of leading this bit of the festival on Empathy Day. And last year, Rashmi Sir-Deshpande, another amazing author, her empathy resolution was to try hard to listen and understand, especially to people I disagree with. And I think that absolutely sort of picks up on the threads of what you guys were just saying. So could we just hear, would you mind sharing your empathy resolutions, Katherine?
Mine is political, in that I have a difficulty not dismissing those who hold an opposing political view from myself. And the news is not making it easier. But I am very aware that one of the reasons that we are in a hard place right now is the increasing entrenchment of people in their political positions. And so the space between, I'm definitely not going to agree with anyone, but the willingness to hear what might be underneath some of the beliefs that are being offered. Perhaps that, because for the last few years, it's been very difficult not just to say, well, if you're a Tory, then I'm leaving. And so my is very similar to the one that you quoted from yesterday, from last year, of I will listen to people, even those who I knee-jerk would find very difficult to empathize with.
Yeah, and that is profound. It's a lifelong journey, this, isn't it? Thank you, Katherine. I find that very moving. Lemn, what would your empathy resolution be?
I'm not sure about this, but I think my empathy resolution would be that, people would be to just try to read people, how people feel, rather than what it is that they're saying.
Oh, yes.
Or to just up that level of awareness, let's say. I'd like to up the level of awareness of thinking how somebody's feeling, regardless of whatever they're saying, really regardless of whatever they're saying, just in their face and body and movements. And
that's so interesting. With the children we work with, there's a kind of discussion, and there's a exercise on Empathy Day about listening, and we break it down, and one of the things is try and hear what's behind the words. And that's exactly Lemn. I'm going to use that quote as perfect. Thank you. Robin, what's yours?
Oh, I love that. Those two that we've just heard from Katherine and Lemn, they go together absolutely brilliantly, going beyond the words, which is so interesting, isn't it? Because we've been talking about words in the context of stories, but that's exactly what is happening, Lemn. We are paying attention to the feelings, aren't we? And it's not just about the words. Okay, so I'm going to do something slightly different. So this year, my empathy, and this might sound a little bit too distant, but I don't mean it to be distant. My empathy resolution is to study history empathically. I feel like psychologists quite often, and I include myself very much in this, are often not very good at history. We tend to focus very much on the here and now. We tend not to think so much about where people have come from and where society has come from. So I want to try and pay attention to that historical trajectory, both of individuals, but also societies, right? Groups, cohorts, and to do that empathically, to understand and to feel where people have come from.
Oh, gosh, thank you all very much. And I'm really missing Manjeet. I would have loved to have heard. It's really,
I'm glad she did get that bit in the middle. She said she was talking fast,
and she
but
got
she
it
brought
in.
out that
Honestly,
key change.
wretched internet. I'm just, before we hand over, I'm going to hand over to my fellow founder, Sarah, who's going to just curate the questions. But I do just want to very quickly whiz you through, everybody who's with us, what people might do for Empathy Day. I hope we can count you all as allies in this empathy movement. Absolutely. There are a lot of people with us today. And if we all took some steps around Empathy Day, we could reach more children, help them learn more about empathy, help them read wonderful books about empathy and put it into practice. So this is what we're asking people to do, and I hope some wonderful slides are going to whiz up. There are 9 challenge activities for Empathy Day, from making empathy glasses to see through somebody else's eyes, to going on empathy walks, to empathy resolutions. And these are available now on our website. We want everybody to do them now. If you can only do one thing on Empathy Day, could you make it the sharing of an empathy-rich book recommendation, like those ones we showed before, ideally in a power pose? Hashtag Empathy Day at EmpathyLab UK. Schools, register to take part and get your resources. There are free toolkits on our website. You just go on our homepage, and wonderful accompanying challenge resources. There's a family pack to do over the Jubilee weekend, all year round, same 9 activities in that pack. And then on June the 9th, celebrate in style in your community and join the most extraordinary band of writers and illustrators leading those same 9 activities. So this is an online festival streaming from 7:30 for children's the current children's laureate and past, and all these films will be available for you to watch afterwards. And this is the link to getting involved, because empathy is activism. So I'm hoping now we have Sarah with us. And Sarah, would you like to take us through the questions?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. That's been such a fascinating discussion. So thank you. And sorry, we've missed Manjeet in the middle, but anyway, thanks to the rest of you for staying with us. We've got such wonderful comments coming in, lots of reflections about what you've been saying. But I thought I'd start with the question from Elle that's come through on Facebook. And Elle asks an interesting question that you can all respond to. When has empathy shown up for you from an unexpected place? So perhaps, Katherine, do you want to start? Put you on the spot a bit, but
right. I think there are so many. I think that one was a few years ago, I was working in a refugee camp in Chios for the summer. And I think one of the narratives that is often propagated is the idea that those who arrive with nothing will necessarily, out of need, or depending on your political slant, whatever, take instantly. And the thing that we were witnessing over and over was people's resistance to taking anything more than they needed from us, and always leaving as much as they could for others. There was a kind of rampant care and generosity for each other in that space that lasted the entire summer. And I remember thinking that if people could witness just people's reaction to trauma being very complicated, but also involving an enormous amount of generosity and empathy for the needs of others, that it might transform some people's political sense. And I think I wish Manjeet was here, because of course the crossing is so much about that. And she did so much brilliant work on it. And if anyone here hasn't read The Crossing, it is a staggering piece of work that talks very deeply and beautifully about the intricate emotional response one might have to these kind of traumas.
Yeah,
thank you. Lemn, so has that happened for you? You're just on mute again.
Well, I think anybody who's read so there is something about when an audience comes to a reading, and I'm going to talk about my experience of reading my own book, which is a little bit. Well, no, there's something that I feel on stage at the end of reading from My Name Is Why, and feeling the audience, it doesn't matter whether it's one or whether it's however many, there's something magical about, sometimes I'll stop at the end of a reading and say, thanks for being here. Thanks for allowing me in. Thanks for accepting these words, and thanks for, in your own heads, and hearts sharing your story openly, because I know that when people hear stories, they open their own stories, and there comes a point where the two are in some strange, beautiful dance together. So when I read from the book on stage live, I definitely feel that empathy has allowed people to share their own stories with me, even though they haven't said a word.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, that sort of human connection that you feel. Yeah,
Oh my God, it's so powerful. And
Yeah.
so I don't know what I'm saying, but I feel empathy towards the audience after a reading, knowing that they often feel empathy towards the person in my book.
Yeah, how interesting. That's really fascinating, because we were going to sort of think about that kind of, that empathy in what is non-fiction, in effect, in a real life situation, and that character that comes through your book, which is you, is a fascinating thing to think about. Robin,
It is. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I judged the Booker Prize a couple of years ago, and Martin Amis put in his autobiography, meaning that non-fiction. What is? Yeah. Anyway, I can't even unpack that thought.
No, but it's an interesting discussion to have. Robin, I'll ask you the same question as well.
Unexpected places. Well, you know what? I think the point about expectation is really interesting, because I think sometimes we carry with us expectations about levels of empathy in our communities and in particular places. And it's one of the most wonderfully affirming things and restorative things when you discover that a kind of a low expectation is completely wrong. I had an experience, I mean, this might sound completely trivial, but it made a difference in the moment, right? I had an experience. I was in a very, very busy tube station. It was Victoria Station in London. And in the tube station, it was so busy. And it was that kind of classic thing, everyone's sort of really busy. It was right in the middle of rush hours, commuting, head down, everyone getting on with their things. And you kind of have this sort of assumption that it's sort of not very caring, that people are just very much in their own world, very individualistic, not really being empathic at all. And so I guess my expectations were low there. I had my hands full. I actually had some food because I was starving. I hadn't had any breakfast. I had some food with me, but I was trying to get my ticket out, and I had a couple of bags. And then everything is one of those moments, because it had been raining as well. One of those moments, the bag broke, everything fell onto the ground. In my effort to try and rescue it, I dropped my food as well. So my precious bacon roll was gone. And in that moment, I was thinking, just typical, right? And I remember this moment because I was so surprised, because I had this kind of feeling, I was just so busy, everyone's just kind of getting on with their own things. But it was really lovely to see so many people. I mean, it wasn't just one person, so many people came to help at that moment. One person was so kind, actually insisted on getting me a new role as well. I mean, it was just really lovely. And I just thought at a time when you feel like, well, people are just, like I said, giving their heads down and just doing their own thing and not really thinking about each other at all, I was completely wrong. They were. And I think it's really, as I said, it was a completely trivial example, but actually small things make a difference. They really do. And I found it quite affirming.
Yeah, it makes you feel good about humanity, doesn't it?
That's what it is. Yeah.
I'm really conscious of time, but I just wanted to highlight, because I think, looking at all the chat that's been happening, quite a lot of it is around the connection between empathy, kindness, and compassion, and also using compassion can you feel empathy for the enemy? Can you forgive? And I think that's come through in the discussion today. So could I ask you, just any of you, to just any thoughts you have around those connections between kindness, compassion, and empathy, and forgiveness as well? So any reflections that you have around those? perhaps maybe starting with Robin, and then I'll come to quickly Katherine.
I mean, the one thing I was going to say, I mean, of course, we've been talking about being empathetic to people where you feel there's real difference, maybe especially to people who may have what seems on the face of it to be diametrically opposed view. Maybe especially in the cases where we feel that someone else's perspective, their words are morally outrageous, really objectionable. Actually putting the effort into what's underneath the like what you were saying, Lemn, the feelings, maybe being empathetic towards that. I think that's really important. The one thing I was going to say though about compassion, and this is something that we picked up in our research with the BBC on the kindness test, was that we also have to direct that empathy and compassion and kindness to ourselves.
Yes,
that's a really, really important point, and it's surprisingly hard. It's surprisingly hard. And sometimes we can be really focused, understandably, really focused on our responses to other people and making sure that we are being empathetic and checking ourselves and, you know, all of that. But we also have to check our compassion to ourselves and, you know, whether we're able to look upon ourselves with empathy. And actually the research made it really clear this is really important for our mental health. And of course, again, this is not a trade-off. It's not as though you have to pick one or the other. It's not as though if you're being compassionate to yourself, then you're completely egotistical and you don't care about other people. Of course not. It's both.
Yeah. I think that's probably a good place to hand back, just to say thank you to all three of you, and to Manjeet. I'm sorry that she's not here. I'm just, my head's buzzing with the thoughts that you've expressed. So thank you, all of you. And I'll just hand back to Miranda now.
Really don't have anything to add other than thank you to our amazing, amazing panelists. I always wish we were together with you in person. You could hear everybody clapping. It's a bit weird on screen, isn't it? But gosh, I'm going to be thinking about this discussion for a very long time. Thank you very much. And we'll be in touch with Manjeet. Well, we have been all the way through. I kind of feel like we should have a separate event with Manjeet and be sure that we can hear her, because she has such interesting things to say. So thank you to everybody for coming. Please, please, let's make Empathy Day enormous. Let's make it just huge this year and in future years. And bless you all for coming. Thank you.
Bless you. Thanks.